Morning, everyone. So we're in recession. I'm just going to actually start off. Shall we spare a thought for the Daily Express this morning? So this is the major headline is "We're on the up, so loosen the purse strings, Mr. Hunt," on the day recession is announced. And it's not just that this recession was a big shock either. What's a shock for me is just how much the economy contracted in quarter three. It ended up being 0.3%. That was more than expected. Well, it's more than I expected anyway. I mean, okay, I'm not an economist. I thought because it was so knife edge, I thought it'd be like 0.1 minus 0.1 or something. So yeah, the Daily Express trying to say, oh, the economy is looking up just as we enter recession. But also just above me in the banner there, Labour crisis deepens as poll leads slumps. The poll leads, of course, show Labour widening their lead over the Conservatives. The YouGov have got them widening it. Ipsos have got them widening it. Even Opinion, who are sort of much kinder to the Conservatives, have it widening. The poll of polls, that's the average across all the major pollsters. Again, this time last week, Labour had a 20-point lead. Now it's a 21-point lead. They're basing this off a poll from Savanta. Now, I could just say Savanta are not one of the good ones, which is true. But also, Savanta themselves had to come out yesterday and say that the analysis, remember a few weeks ago when the Telegraph did that hatchet job on analysis from the YouGov poll, and YouGov had to come out and say, no, this is all crap. Savanta have basically done the same thing. So the Daily Express are reporting, someone from Savanta actually should have known better, drawing various conclusions. And Savanta actually had to tweet out a clarification saying, no, you can't draw those conclusions. That's absolute rubbish. So, yeah, they're just puffing on a bit of copium there, but we'll get rid of them because recession and what it means for Rishi Sunak. Now, obviously, so I've sort of said in the past, like, the Conservatives are clearly going for a May election. Now, over the past, since late summer, basically, when I've been saying it's going to be a May election, probably, I've given various reasons why the Conservatives would want a May election, mostly in terms of how the news is just going to get so much worse if they wait until autumn. But I'm gonna switch away from that line of thinking, and I'll explain what the Conservatives are actually doing now, right? Which means that anyone who's paying attention knows the Conservatives are aiming for May. They're not fooling Labour. Isaac Levidow, the Tory strategist, is now employed full-time every single day. He's at CCHQ, Conservative Campaign Headquarters, every single day, except when he's at Downing Street. Someone I follow, there's a couple of people I follow who are really paying close attention to this. You don't see this reported in the media. Not only is CCHQ an absolute hive of activity, bear in mind, when was it now? I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. They actually shut it down for a bit to save on cost. They even stopped cleaning it. They were that hard up, right? Now it is fully in operation. Every office heaving, in campaign mode. But also Isaac Levidow has been visiting Downing Street 2 or 3 times a day recently. He was in there in and out yesterday as well. Now, why would your election, he is there to run their general election campaign. Why would he be in and out of Downing Street multiple times a day if the election was still 8 months away or something? Wouldn't be, would he? Wouldn't be. So no, they're definitely going for May. The question is, does this recession now change that? There's a sense in which you say, okay, it could do that because the obviously if they have a May 2nd election, or even early, it could be April. But if they have an election no later than May the 2nd, then it means announcing the election by the end of March, which means we cannot get the news that we're not in recession until mid-May now. It's probable that we're not actually now in recession, that the quarter we're in at the moment will sort of see growth, but we won't find out until mid-May. So Rishi Sunak would have to announce the election whilst technically we're still in recession, we'd have to have the election whilst we're still technically in recession. So you think to yourself, well, come on, recession is a really scary word. Surely no prime minister's stupid enough to call an election in a recession if they can delay it. But then you think to yourself, Rishi Sunak will have known that recession was on the cards when they started ramping up their campaign spending last month. He'll have known that. I've suspected it. I've said myself, because I keep an eye. It's not a perfect science, but because I keep an eye on ad revenue rates that I get on my channel, I had an inkling. You know, the rates were very much recessionary. You couldn't say, oh yeah, I can't look at my spreadsheet and go, oh yeah, that's a recession. Like I've got some secret plan or something, secret scheme. But you could look at it and thought, yeah, this could be a recession. So they would have known that there was a good chance. The other thing to note is Rishi Sunak could have avoided this recession, easy as pie. Last autumn, he triggered a number of cuts that would have affected the poorest in society. And if he hadn't done that, we wouldn't have had this recession at all. We'd have dodged it. So he deliberately made those cuts last autumn in his obsession to get inflation down, knowing that he was sacrificing growth. So he will have known that. He'll have had people telling him that that's what his policy would do. So he deliberately sacrificed growth. Now, that tells me, given that he has massively ramped up the campaign machine last month, he hasn't waited to see if we're in recession or not. He massively ramped up that campaign. The fact that he deliberately gambled on a recession, he created the economic conditions which would have made a recession fairly likely, and he did that knowingly, suggests to me that actually they factored recession into their plans and that they'll still go for May. So I still think May. I keep going with early May general election dates. What if the general election is held in late May, by which time it could be out of recession? So there is that. I'll tell you why that. It's not impossible, by the way, what you're saying. Why it wouldn't be ideal for them is because on May the 2nd, regardless of when the general election is, we have got local and mayoral elections. Now, the Tories, if they're still in power when those elections are held, will be spanked. And some of those May elections, those mayoral elections are, well, put it this way, they don't want to lose the Teesside, the sort of northeast mayoral election. So yeah, if they're going to have it, they need to have it by May. If they're going to have it in spring at all, it makes more sense to have it May the 2nd. Yes, you can definitely say there's an argument that if recession's that big a deal to them, hold it off. But what I would come back to is, if they were that bothered about recession, they could have stopped the recession. They could have nipped it in the bud, right? So they haven't done that. Morning, Daily Blase. Or employ a chief secretary of the Treasury who knows what GDP is. Yeah, it's too complicated for the Tories. Like I say, I mean, you know, Laura Trott, okay, she's particularly witless, granted, but this is a direct consequence of Brexit. You know, to have, if you insist as a political party that the only people that are allowed to control the levers of power are those who believe in Brexit, it means what you're doing is you're either getting people to lie and pretend they're in favor of Brexit, but they're not really, or get people who are actually pretty thick. So the fact that we have people like Laura Trott in senior positions managing our economy is a consequence of that Brexit thinking, that you cannot have people in positions who will go, look, Brexit's rubbish. Which is why you'll get instantly an improvement with Labour, although Labour's senior ministers, when they're in government, will not mostly, some of them have got government experience, but not many of them have got experience. But why they'll be so much better straight away is largely because publicly they'll have to toe the party line on Brexit. But to each other, they won't have to come up with that crap. They won't have to pretend that they're Brexiteers or anything. So it means Labour don't have to just put the idiots in charge. Say Laura Trott's from my neck of the woods. Well, that doesn't matter. Jeremy Clark's is from my neck of the woods, but I don't take responsibility for his stupidity. But there we go. In terms of the, by the way, while we're talking about recession, just in terms of the economy, for anyone that's interested, overall, what this means is because Q4 was a 0.3% contraction and Q3 was a 0.1% contraction. So basically, I mean, that's mad, isn't it? The last quarter, the economy contracted significantly over the third quarter, which is mad because spending, it ramps up in the final quarter. You know, there's all sorts of like autumn and winter holidays culminating Christmas, where there's a lot of spending going on. But there wasn't. We knew that the retail sales were down. So the only way we were going to dodge recession is if it turned out people drank themselves to death, because alcohol sales wouldn't have been included in those retail figures, right? But the overall growth for the economy last year was 0.1%. But in terms of GDP per capita, which is more important, it actually shrunk by 0.7%. And this is why, and people have been making this point today, this is why the Tories cannot win on the economy, even though it's their best chance, because people feel poorer. How can you not feel poorer when GDP per capita has been falling every year for the last few years? It's an acceleration. Like for most of the Tories' time in power, living standards were dropping, and you could see it on charts. You could see it, but you couldn't necessarily feel it because it was frog in a boiling pot. It was squeezed slowly, slowly, slowly. But then over the last few years, accelerated by COVID, of course, it's become noticeable. People may not remember what life was like for them 15 years ago, but they can remember what it was like a year ago or 2 years ago. But there we go. Full rejoin will take 15 plus years minimum. Many Remainers don't realise that. But the UK can join. We can't join EFTA. No. From outside the EU for now. No, we can't. They don't want us. And it's not actually a benefit to us. It would be easier for us to join the single market and customs union separately than it would be to join EFTA. EFTA don't want us. We don't really benefit from EFTA either. But in terms of the joining, yes. I mean, what a lot of Remainers don't necessarily understand, I'm afraid, is we physically can't. If Labour said, oh, we're going to do this, they actually don't have the power to do it. And I don't just mean because it's up to the EU as well. What I mean is the EU will say no, because we do not meet their accession requirements. If you look at the accession requirements, we do not meet them. Now, so in order to rejoin, even inside the next 10 years, we would need to get an awful lot of opt-outs. And as people are quite open about, we're not going to get all those opt-outs. We might get the odd one, because membership is a negotiating process. It is possible to bypass the odd requirements through negotiation, but we're not going to get the sheer number we need. The reason, and I know it's confusing because people will think, but we were in the EU just a few years ago, so what's changed in the UK since? Well, some things have changed, but it doesn't. The reason we were in the EU is because we were a founding member. Now, just to head off the past, it goes, no, we weren't. It's like, yes, we were. We weren't a founder member of the EEC. We joined the EEC, but we were a founder member of the EU, which is what the EEC became. And as a result, just like every other founder member, they created conditions for new countries to join, but they did not apply to the existing members. So we got a pass on an awful lot of things. But there we go. Bring on Euro and Schengen. I mean, yeah, Euro and Schengen will be the two sticking points. They are clearly going to be the things that cause a lot of people in this country who would like to rejoin to go, oh, but not if we have to do that. So we do have to be wary of that. There are good economic reasons to not want to adopt the euro for us. It is possible we could get an opt-out on one or even both of them, but we can't obviously guarantee it at the point at which we begin talks. But there we go. Could we not have a 10-year anniversary referendum on rejoining? Might bring the country together. I am hoping for movement before. Although I say we can't rejoin the EU inside the next 10 years, it doesn't mean to say I think we are going to have movement. I think there's going to be movement. I don't think we have to wait 10 years before we're more openly wanting to join the EU. But the first step has to be a settled position in the UK that we want to rejoin, because there's still a hell of a lot to do after that. So I am hoping that you say Scotland could join the fuse. No, it can't. Even if Scotland were independent, it still can't. Again, something that people who think an independent Scotland can just join the EU seem to forget. Part of the process of joining the EU, if the rest of the UK doesn't do it at the same time, is creating a hard trade border with England, which is Scotland's largest market still. So, when we talk about it was Brexit, the hard Brexit was madness because we were raising trade barriers to trade with our largest market. So as the UK as a whole, our largest market is the EU single market at any rate. That's the EEA, which is more than the EU. The same applies to Scotland. Scotland's largest individual market is the rest of Britain. So they'd have to create a hard border, which would not only be expensive, but would be closed. And they'd have to do this before they joined the EU. So before they could join the single market, they'd have to shut off access to their own largest market. And there's no plan for it. No one's written down a plan for that. The SNP don't have a plan for it. The SNP still don't even have a plan for money. So no, Scotland would take... What would happen? Let us just imagine that in a couple of years, there's a Scottish referendum, and let us say that it results in a vote for independence. Let's just imagine. I will bet you anything that Scotland joins the EU on the same day the rest of the UK does. I'll bet you anything, because it's the only realistic way to do it. But there we go. Anyway, we seem to have gone on to Brexit somehow. It is somewhat of my favourite topic. But there we go. Scotland's second largest market is Scotland. Is it? I actually didn't know that. I do know that it's largest. It is the British market is the largest market, and the amount of trade it would lose if it built a hard. Obviously, building a hard trade border with England doesn't mean losing all trade with England. Just like we haven't lost all trade with the EU, or even most of it. It just means that you lose a lot. But there we go. We'll closely align possible negotiation for single market membership in the next 10 years. So in terms of this is what I'm hoping for, as we now seem to be talking about Brexit. In terms of the single market, so there is a plan to create a sort of satellite membership of the EU, which means you don't take on the political alignment aspect of being in the EU, but you do have the trade alignment. So in other words, single market access. That would be a good first step for me. Where it becomes a problem is it needs driving. At the moment, France and Germany are in favor of this. Now, we do have to beware, because there's always a problem with France in that does one of the, Marine Le Pen at the moment, does she end up becoming president and throwing the whole thing out? So we'll have to wait and see on that one, because that is always a danger. Captain Bart Roberts, £5 super chat. Thank you very much. The Tories seem to have comprehensively effed every lever of state that will be available to Labour. Yes, there is absolutely zero doubt Labour will enter a completely broken economy. There's no doubt about it. You're not going to turn that oil tanker around anytime soon. But there are things that can be done quickly. They do have options. First of all, just removing a lot of the crony contracts saves money. The closing off tax loopholes generates more tax revenue without putting up any particular rate of tax. Working with the EU to try and reduce some of these trade barriers. They'll never reduce them down to where they were in 2019, so we'll always be behind then. But they can reduce it compared with where it is now. But there we go. Will I stream live the general election? So I'm not. I will probably do some sort of stream. I am not on my own channel, that is. Graham may well do one here. I'm not going to obviously stream through the night because that would be boring. What I may do is have a stream that starts just before the polls close and goes on for a bit afterwards, because then we could always have a discussion about the exit polls, because the exit, the polls close at 10 p.m. and then you have exit polls published over the following, few minutes really. So I will probably do some sort of live stream, yes, and then probably another one the next day when most of the results are known. There's always going to be a few lackadaisical results coming in where you've got like lots of rural areas where it's really hard to get the results in. Will Labour keep or remove voter ID rules for elections? So that's a good question. I don't know. I do know that Labour must do something. They have to do something. And to my mind, realistically, there's only two things they can do unless someone else has got a different idea. First of all, get rid of voter ID. Second, make sure absolutely everyone has voter ID. Now, what Labour can certainly do in the interim is do you know how there's this great long list of acceptable voter ID for elderly people and a really tiny list for young people? So Labour can obviously modify the list of acceptable voter IDs. That could be one thing they do. But ultimately, in terms of dealing with the problem, they either have to make sure that everyone has voter ID paid for by the state and that everyone knows they need it to vote, or they get rid of the requirement. But I don't know what they will actually plan to do, but they can't leave it as it is. Cannot leave it as it is. In fact, Graham's just said a few of us are planning to meet up in London, not me, for a party on election night, which will be streamed. Are Labour able to kick private healthcare out of NHS board financial decisions? So yes, that is something I will be looking for them doing, certainly. So for those who don't know, so NHS trusts obviously have boards, and these are people who decide how they're going to allocate their budgets. A couple of years ago, it was decided, it was Sajid Javid who was the health secretary at the time. It was decided, we should get private healthcare providers on these boards. So basically, you have private healthcare providers, people who own private healthcare businesses or are chief executives for private healthcare businesses, are on the boards of NHS trusts deciding how to allocate funds. So can you imagine that? You have these, how should we allocate these funds? Oh, well, I know this really great company who could deliver this service. Isn't that your company? Yeah, it is. So yeah, Labour, I will absolutely be looking for Labour to change that fairly promptly. Certainly. Again, I haven't heard that they've said anything like that, but I would certainly expect that. Wife says hospital she works at spends loads on consultant bureaucrats on a daily rate of thousands, but contribute nothing. Yeah, I mean, you get this everywhere. They're all pals hiring each other. Labour could cut this waste. Yes, absolutely, certainly. There is scope for. The thing is, as long as I can remember, politicians have always said, in opposition when they're about to sort of win power, they've always sort of said, so how are you going to be able to boost these services without charging more in taxes? And the answer always is, we're going to cut waste. We're going to cut waste. Oh, there's so much waste in the system. They do it all the time. In fact, I'm rather surprised Labour aren't doing it now. But generally speaks, fairly standard just to say, there's so much waste. But at the moment, there really is, because quite a lot of the time in the past, there isn't that much waste. It's fairly recently that we've actually had a government that's generated huge levels of waste in terms of public spending. I mean, the COVID was just blatant. Things like the track and trace and the VIP lane, that was just blatant waste of money. But there's so many sources of it. It's ridiculous. You say Wes Streeting seems a bit keen on private healthcare providers. He's not. Well, he may be, I don't know. But in terms of the policies, that's not the case. I will keep pointing out, Labour's formal policy on healthcare is insourcing. In fact, they've said there will be a record amount of insourcing. That means removing private providers from NHS provision and making it more of it in-house, right? Now, people will know that Labour have said they're going to use more private capacity to get the waiting list down. That's what that's for, the waiting list. It's using private capacity, private healthcare providers to get the waiting list down. We cannot allow a waiting list of 8 million people. That's unconscionable. That is, so you cannot just do that out of a sense of ideology. No, we'll get the waiting list down when we've got the NHS back to where it should be, because then you're sacrificing people's lives as well as productivity. Hurts the economy. The longer it takes people to recover and get it back up to full recovery, the more you're hurting your economy. So it makes economic sense. But that's all that is. That's not increased privatization. That is using the private sector not to deliver an existing NHS service, but to say the NHS cannot get this backlog down. But that's all it's for. And I will be keeping my eyes on that as well. I say Wes Street has been taking bungs from private health. So I know he's received donations from private healthcare providers. We don't know that they're bungs unless he gives them favorable contracts. Again, we will wait and see. I strongly suspect not, because Labour's policies run counter to that. But, I don't ever say, oh, you can trust a politician. Never say that about any politician. So we'll wait and see. Thomas saying, associate member of the EU is nonsense, Phil. This will be, there'll be no outer circle of countries with the EU. The UK will have to join as a new member. No, you're quite wrong about that. They're not doing it for us, by the way. They're doing it mostly for Ukraine. But also consider there's a lot of aggro within the EU at the moment from countries around Central and Eastern Europe who like because remember, the saying, the sort of phrase was about the UK joining in the first place, like the EEC in the first place. It was entirely mercantile. We were never sold on the political alignment. We were interested in the readies, the money that could be made from it. So our interest was always economic. Well, do you know what? We are no longer an outlier on that, because all of these former Soviet countries and also countries like Poland, that was their interest as well. They didn't join for the political benefits. They joined for the economic benefits, pure and simple. So in Poland, Hungary, Latvia, places like that, they are basically like, their attitude to the EU is like the UK's attitude to the EU. Only they feel less kinship with the major powers of Europe, right? So there is a huge advantage in saying, because at the moment, I mean, look what's had to happen. Hungary's had to be brought to heel recently by the EU because it has been a major obstacle to providing support to Ukraine. Hungary is basically pro-Russia in this, right? So there is an advantage in making it, in sort of saying to countries, look, if you don't want the political alignment and you just want the economic alignment, there's an option for that. So that would actually allow the political alignments to become much stronger amongst those countries who wanted it. So there's huge advantages to this idea. I mean, the fact that it's been pushed by France and Germany should tell you that, if you didn't understand why. But also it's a huge benefit for Ukraine, or getting Ukraine in the EU. Ukraine is in no fit place to join the EU, even if it kicked Russia out of its land, right, and secured its borders. Ukraine is a very long way from being fit to join the EU. Just because it wants to join the EU doesn't mean to say it's fit to join the EU. So it will not be able to join the EU for over a generation. So the idea is, well, if we had a transitionary form of membership, not accession status, but something closer that gave them the economic benefits of the EU, but before joining the union proper, that would be a huge benefit in getting Ukraine on board rather than abandoning them, which is how it will be seen. So no, there's a really strong case for this associate member scheme. It solves a lot of problems. It's not purely about, making things easy for the UK. It makes things easy for everyone in Europe, including Ukraine. So I think there's, as long as France remains politically stable, which means either Macron keeps winning or at least not Marine Le Pen, then I can see this happening. And I can see that being, in 5 years' time, a thing that the UK looks at and goes, oh, Oh, well, we weren't offered this. Oh, yeah, we can totally get on board with this. But there we go. I'll just check if there's any more obvious messages related to the main topic. Someone's talking about someone, but I've lost the thread, so I'm sure I'm not going to reply to that. So I'll finish off there just by wishing everyone a good day. Not so much Rishi Sunak. And don't forget to click the like button and to subscribe to the channel as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.